This presentation is for the xCell PUR. And so we're going to go through all of the features, the cords that come with it, where to plug them in, what everything is for, the different programs, the test menus, the configuration menu. So this presentation is not to teach electrolysis. Obviously, it is to teach you how to use the machine and what is on the machine. So the description of the device itself, so from the front to the back, essentially this is a touchscreen machine. So we have the touchscreen in the front. There might be some things that point to things that do not relate to the PUR. That is because this PowerPoint presentation was for both the PUR and the Pro version. Side note, I will be doing a Pro training also. It won't cover all the features because I'm doing that right now, and a lot of the features on the PUR are on the Pro, but I will go through the Pro and the customer management system, creating files and all of that would be specific to the Pro itself. So we'll do that at a different time. But for now, some of the things might not relate, like there's something that points to the slot in the machine that is a printer. It does not matter for the PUR itself, but it's the same machine casing for both. So keep that in mind. So it is aluminum casting, and there is at the top a little plastic sort of lip that is for the stylus, so you can sort of rest things up there, and the little holes that are on there are for actually placing your electrodes. If you don't sterilize them and keep them in bags, some people will actually poke them through the top there. The back of the machine, you have the power cord, so the power connector. Let me get my pointer. The power connector down here. You have the fuse right next to that. The pedal connects back here. There is one power switch here, and then there's the start button there. So there's actually two ways to turn on this machine. You want to be careful that you're not panicking when you're trying to press this button to turn it on and nothing is happening. It could be that you did not turn it on back here. So I am going to start, if you can see the webcam here, let me make it a little bit bigger. And let's go ahead and turn on our machine. Okay, so let me move this around and show you a little bit of what I've got. So on the back of the machine itself, the on and off switch is here, back here. Usually when you have it on the line, it is on, and when it is on a circle, it is off. So you always want to double check that when you're turning it on, it's on the line part of it. And then at this point, this is where you can hit the button here in order to be able to turn on the machine. So turn this back around. When you turn on the machine, press and hold down on the little button right underneath the lip of it. So where we were talking about, just right over here on the side, you press and hold down and the machine will light up. Just like a computer, you need to sort of let it boot up. So at this point here, we let the machine do its thing. Let me get this nice and close so that we'll be able to see it once we have it on. Okay. So our machine is turned on and we are going to let it boot. Let's see if we can get this a little clearer. Sorry that it's not the most clear picture that we can get here, but it should do the job as far as you following along on the screen itself. So the machine's turned on. We're going to go through a couple of screens that are going to be about setting up the machine. Usually when you buy the machine new, when you turn it on, you don't go to this screen that I was just displaying on the video. What you go through is a screen to set up the date and the time, the language, and things like that, just like when you get a new phone and you set it up. So let's go back to our PowerPoint. And the PowerPoint here will show on the side. So again, smart card readers for the Pro, so we can ignore that. There is a USB port that is going to be on the left side. So if you look on the left side of the face of the machine, there's a little USB port, and that USB port is going to be for updates. So when you update your machine, you can actually download the newest version on the USB. There is a platform for the xCell where you can actually register your machine and access the latest updates. I'll post that in a little bit, so you can put in your serial number, get a login, and then access a lot of the training PowerPoints are on there, some short videos, shortcuts, that sort of thing, but the updates will be there too. So you can download updates on USBs, plug your USB into your machine, boot up your machine, and then actually update the machine just like that. Accessories holders are on the sides. Both sides will have these accessory holders. So the probe holders, for example, fit in this top one here. If you have the older version of the Cataphoresis wand, it fits here. And if you have vitaphases, because you're not in the US, you're in another country, and you can actually have vitaphases, that's what this big area here is for. The vitaphase plugs are on the sides. Again, in the US, that is not something that the machines can come with. So they might actually be capped off. You have a little silver plastic circle there. If you're in another country, I think somebody said they were from Colombia, and so probably has the vitaphase plugs on each side, so she can have devices that are the vitaphases. We'll go through that at the end. The probe holders get plugged into the front. The probe holders are going to be specific to the 27 megahertz machines. This is why they're actually different as far as the plug part from the 13.56 megahertz machine. So if you've had one of those in the past, you'll notice that you cannot interchangeably use the cords from one to the other. They get screwed into the front there. And the machine comes with two different types of probe holders when you buy them. One is called the regular, one is called the short. The main difference between those two, let me go back to my camera. So go back to the video if you're looking at one thing at a time. Main difference between those two is that the regular is long, the short will be a little bit shorter, about half. The Detro makes an extra short. An extra short would be another half of that, so even shorter than this. So you could order an extra short probe cord that is even shorter than the short. On the left side, where you, in the front of the machine, this is where you connect the red cable. The red cable comes with a few different attachments. One is going to be the plate. The plate is the black rubber flat thing. And then you have the bar. The bar is the metal rod here. Both of those will plug into the end of your banana cord here. The other end goes in here. These are the wet sponges that come with a machine. For sanitation purposes, most of the time people will use paper towels that have been wetted or some sort of wipe. All of that is perfectly okay. You want to have some sort of wet connection, wet ground on top of your electrode. We use the red connector for auto mode. We use the red connector for blend modes, the tolerance tests, and when we do pure galvanic. So anytime that direct current is used or some sort of feedback is needed, we are going to need the ground. The light right over the connector will turn on when this is necessary. So you'll actually have a little light that will shine directly on that cord, letting you know that the cord is actually required. So when you work auto mode, which is working without the foot pedal, when you engage auto mode, the light will light up on top of the red cord, and that tells you that you actually need to give the client the ground in order to be able to do auto mode. Always place a wet sponge on the electrode. It just is better for conductivity. On the opposite end, we have the black connector. So that is the black cord. that comes with the wand. Now, I'm sure most of you have noticed if you've got a newer version of the machine, the wand has changed. So instead of being the one that is like the little handle, like this one here, we have something that looks more like this one here. So both of these will work. Essentially, all it is to put one of the electrodes. So an electrode will be like this roller here, and you can just click it right inside of the wand itself and use it that way. If you have the older version, then it is almost like putting a probe cap and a probe at the end of your probe holder, where you just unscrew it a little bit, put in your electrode, and then tighten it. And that way you have it here. So these PowerPoints came at a time when ionophoresis was flagged for Dectro. And so they didn't want to let the machines in that had cataphoresis because they decided that only doctors could do that. That has since been reversed. So you can ignore when it says not available in the USA. It definitely is available in the USA. You will have the cataphoresis, anaphoresis available on all of the machines. So first time startup, like I was telling you, when you first get the machine, you sort of go through some setups. And one of those is setting the language. So you can set the language on the machine. A few languages come with the machine, not all of them. And then the next screen will be the date and time. So when you go through, then it will ask you to set up the date and time. Date and time comes as a 12-hour clock or a 24-hour clock, which is like military time. So if you haven't noticed this before and your machine says, 1732, well, you know that you can go back and have it on a 12-hour clock and it will say 532 instead. So date and time is set up here, and I will show you in the configuration menu where this gets changed also. Once you've done your setup and you turn on your machine, you should see this home screen. So anytime you get lost and you see a little house and I'll say just go home, it will take you back to this screen here. So the home screen will display your modalities. So these are thermolysis modalities. When you see the wavelength, think thermolysis. This is the blend modalities. And when you see the battery with the wave through it, these are blends. And these, if you can notice the cataphoresis, this is a vitaphase. These are the aftercares. And so anaphoresis and cataphoresis are found here. Now, you may not have all of these options because some that are options for the xCell PUR is the Synchro, which is this thermolysis modality here, the Synchro blend, and the Evolute blend. So you may turn on your machine and only have the top 3 on each category, unless you purchased the extras. The Pro comes with these extras integrated. The PUR does not unless you purchase them. So if you buy a PUR and you buy the extras, you've essentially got the exact same machine as a Pro, except that you don't have any of the client management system that comes with the Pro. That's sort of what I covered up here. Then on the right, you see 4 different menus. So the treatment screen, this is where we select a modality and then press on the treatment screen there and go into our working screen. So where we'll actually do the electrolysis. This one here is highlighted because it is the modes key, and this is what I'm displaying right now. Then I have tests where the tolerance test would be found, where the moisture test could be found, and then my configuration screens. So let's start with the thermolysis modalities. Thermolysis is high frequency current, which is alternating, which constantly changes polarity. This change in polarity causes attraction and repulsion between the atoms in the tissues. And that push and pull movement creates friction. Friction causes heat, and you heat the tissues hot enough that you will end up destroying the cells responsible for hair growth. So essentially, when we do thermolysis, we use AC current. AC current causes this vibration in the tissues. We heat them up, and it kills the cells. So our thermolysis modalities, we have Picoflash, we have the Mellow Flash, we have Multiplex, and the optional Synchro. So those are all the modalities that we'll go through. When we are on our home screen and we want to display a treatment screen, Let me go back to my machine here. So I know that it's not the best quality, but you should be able to follow along. So what I want to do is select the Picoflash here. So I will select the first modality there. It needs to be highlighted. And so once it's highlighted, then after that, I can go into my treatment screen, which is going to be the top right here, the little scroll bars. So I'll press there, and this will display my Picoflash. So I will see up here, Picoflash. Now, if the machine is brand new, you're not going to have an area or a preset loaded. I have a preset loaded because this is the last thing that I used on this machine, and so the machine remembers it. Therefore, it will populate some sort of time and intensity. So on my treatment screen with Picoflash, essentially this modality is a modality that is in thousandths of a second and that is high intensity. High intensity is usually something that will be above 60%. So if we go back to our PowerPoint, if you're flipping back and forth, look at the time, look at the intensity. This is the time and intensity for this preset here. So we have 3 spots after the decimal, so 0.040, which is 40 thousandths of a second. And this is our intensity, which is 68% in this case here. The third thing that we see is our pulses. So when you see the little bumps, think pulses. And so we have it on 1 pulse right now, meaning that when I press on the foot pedal, it will just beep once. But I can change that, and the machine will give you as many as 9 pulses. So you can go up from there. On the right-hand side, remember I told you if you get lost, you want to just go home, you can click the home button and go back home. We have a timer, we have our presets, we have some fine-tuning with the probes, the type of insulation that we can put in, and this is our auto mode. We'll go through all of these independently. Up here we have energy levels displayed because we are in thermolysis, and so energy levels are going to be displayed for this. This is a hair counter. The hair counter just counts pedal pushes. So anytime you press on the pedal, this number will go up. You want to reset it, you'll click on this little arrow going in a circle. It will zero it out again. So you can use that to essentially count hairs while working on a client. Time and date is displayed here, so you can actually see the time when you're working, but you can also have a timer, which is nice to be able to see both. And this padlock is to lock your setting in order to start working. You have to have that pressed down in order for it to actually work. Remember I told you that you can do 2 pulses. Essentially, when you are doing Picoflash with 2 pulses, this technique, displacement, we talk about displacement quite a bit. So this slide is important just to understand what we're talking about. Essentially, displacement is working with multiple pulses, but delivering the pulses in different parts of the follicle. Most of you probably do this already. This is not new technology, but maybe the way that I refer to it as might be new to you. So let's say that I have an insulated probe doing a deep insertion on an anagen hair. I have my machine set for Picoflash, and I want to do a double pulse. My first pulse could be delivered down at the bottom of the follicle there. I could retract a little bit, and then the second pulse will be delivered up a little bit higher. So usually when you do displacement, you do need to use insulated probes. If you've watched some of Dr. Schuster's videos or egg white experiments with varying depth of insertions and non-insulated probes, there is a difference in concentration of energy. So you want to be careful when you're moving if you're not using insulated probes. So doing 2 pulses, here's our Picoflash screen again. And this is the settings when we have 1 pulse only. So with an underarm 3, for example, we have 0.029 seconds at 64%, 1 pulse. When we set it up, and here's our energy level, 119. If I were to do a double pulse manually, that means that I am pressing on the foot pedal twice with my foot. What happens is that I have to double this time and intensity, this energy levels. I would be delivering about 240 energy levels. But the machine is adjusted in such a way that if you start to deliver multiple pulses, it will actually lower the timing, sometimes the time and the intensity of each individual pulse. The reason for that is because it takes into account that in the time in between pulses, your tissues retain the heat from the first pulse. And so when you're delivering the second pulse, your tissues are already warmed up a little bit. And so that second pulse could be much more intense. So taking that into account, it just makes all of them a little bit less intense. I believe it's 25% less or something like that. And then when you have the energy level calculation, this is overall energy level, meaning for 2 pulses, it is 180 versus being manual, that would be at 238. So you have less energy being delivered just because you're delivering it in pulses, and it takes into account that your tissues retain some of the heat. You can adjust the time between pulses. If you've noticed, when I've set the machine to 2 pulses, there's a new thing that popped up on the screen. This here is the pulse, the time in between the pulse. So that time delay in between the pulse, factory preset is half a second. That is 0.5. Be careful when you're setting this up. I get phone calls sometimes, people saying that it's not double pulsing right, but they are putting in maybe 0.05, which is, you know, 500ths of a second, and that is extremely fast. So you wouldn't really be able to tell most of the time that there are 2 separate pulses happening. So double check your numbers when you're doing this. Anytime that you are setting something here, I will show you with the camera. Let's set double pulses on here. I wish this was clear. It's just blurry. So I will set my machine to do 2 pulses. Essentially, you can navigate this a couple different ways. You can, it doesn't like me. Okay, you can move the little circle up and down. Try to move my fingers out of the way. You can use the arrow tops, and it just doesn't like me doing it there. The arrow tops there in order to move it up and down. And you can also tap directly on the number itself and then put in whatever you want, which was 2 pulses. So if I wanted 9, for example, I could do 9 and then put it here, and it will move it up for me. So that's a little too much, but let's say we just want 2 pulses. So 2 pulses here, this showed up. This is my time in between my pulses. So it's on half a second, but let's say I want to do a little longer. So I can tap directly on that. And then now this is where you want to be careful, because if you just do 9 and click OK, you'll notice that the 9 is in the hundredths position. That doesn't work. That would be pretty much 900ths of a second. So we want 90 so that the 9 moves up next to the decimal. So double check when you're doing this that you're putting in the right time. Press OK, and now you can't really see it too well, but it says 0.90. So I've changed the time in between my pulses. I've changed the pulses here, and it recalculates the energy level for me automatically, and that gets displayed up here. Okay, let's go back to our PowerPoint. So now we're going to go into a different modality. So let's say I was working with Picoflash, but I want to change to Mellow Flash. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go home, and then I'm going to select Mellow Flash, and then I'm going to click back on those scroll bars in order to load the Mellow Flash screen. So let's do that real quick together using the webcam. So time for Mellow Flash. So I'm going to go home. I'm going to select the Mellow Flash, which is the third one down here, and I'm going to press on the scroll bars here. Now I have Mellow Flash on the screen. Keep in mind that the machine will actually remember what preset you've selected, what probe you've selected, and if you're on auto mode or not. So this, you don't have to reset every time. Same thing with the timer. So you can move between modalities and it will remember what you've used here. It probably, I think it resets the pulses though. So if I had it set on 2 pulses in my Picoflash, it's back to 1. So if I wanted to do 2 pulses with this method, I would have to move it up. Now it's on 2, but it did remember my 0.9 here. It does not go back to 0.5 unless I set it to be 0.5. So if you've changed it just for one client, know that it will remember that next time. So now we're in Mellow Flash. I've pretty much put the settings exactly like how I had it before. It calculates my energy levels for me. The difference between Picoflash and Mellow Flash is that Mellow Flash is in hundredths of a second. So let's go back to our PowerPoint. And we have Mellow Flash. If you look at your time and your intensity, Mellow Flash is in hundredths of a second, so 2 spots after the decimal. And my percent is what we call medium intensity, which is between 40 to 60%. So the timing is longer, the intensity is a little bit lower. What that does is it allows for a little bit more spread of the current, so a bit of a wider treatment area. My teardrop pattern is a little bit fatter than it was with the Picoflash. Picoflash is very concentrated. That has to do with the speed of the pulse. The faster the pulse, the less time the current has to actually penetrate the walls of the follicle or the tissues. So usually we'll use Mellow Flash for thicker hairs, deeper hairs, because you have a bit of a wider area of coagulation. With Picoflash, it's much more concentrated, so we tend to use that modality more for thinner hairs. It will also be a bit more efficient to do something with Mellow Flash if the hair is thicker and bigger, just because you're going to reach more parts of the follicle than if you use something like Picoflash all the time. As far as sensation goes, Picoflash will be more comfortable than Mellow Flash, and that again is just because of the timing. Even though the intensity, the percent, is higher with Picoflash, because it's in thousandths of a second, it's so quick, you don't feel it as much. And so for sensitive clients, people might opt to go the Picoflash route. Multiplex is kind of different. And so when we look at a screen with Multiplex, you can see what's going on just by looking at all the different scroll bars, but there's definitely a lot of them. What we have on the left here is slow thermolysis. Slow thermolysis, like the thermolysis that you see in blends. The percent of the slow thermolysis in this case is going to be below 12%. The reason for that is because we're not looking to coagulate with this part of the pulse. What we're looking to do is prepare the follicle. And we prepare the follicle for the pulse that comes at the end, which is going to be here, our Picoflash. We know it's Picoflash because there is 3 spaces after the decimal, so that's thousandths of a second, and the intensity will tend to be above 60%. Now, it doesn't mean that it has to or it doesn't work, it's just that that's usually a rule of thumb. Picoflash, thousandths of a second, higher intensity. So remember I said that the Picoflash was very concentrated, and so usually not the best for thicker, deeper type of hairs, but it is also the most comfortable. So what you have with Multiplex is you actually have slow thermolysis preparing the follicle to increase the conductivity. And when the pulse of Picoflash goes through, it reaches a little bit further than it would if you just use Picoflash alone. So it just helps with the concentration that you see with Picoflash by itself. This is a graph showing what the pulse might look like. The slow thermolysis is slow timing. We see here 1.14 seconds. So definitely longer timing. The Picoflash pulse is still very quick. So you have long pulse, but a low intensity to prepare the follicle, and then a quick and high intensity pulse in order to destroy the actual cells in the follicle. The one thing to know with the Multiplex is that you have to press and hold down the foot pedal. If you don't hold it down, you lift it up too soon, it will interrupt the current. And so the machine will not just keep going like a light switch. If you lift your foot off right here, it's going to stop the pulse at this point here. So the Picoflash will never get delivered. Sometimes people work with the Multiplex, say it doesn't work, but they're not keeping their foot down until the actual beep happens. So let's go back to our webcam and I will actually go through a pulse of Multiplex here. So first we have to select the Multiplex. So we go home, we select the Multiplex, which is the second one down, and we press on our scroll bars. Now we have the Multiplex screen loaded. It kept my body, my preset as it was, my probe as it was, and everything else. It just got rid of my second pulse. Again, if I want to do 2 pulses, I'll have to set it up here. With this setting here, I have 1.03 seconds, 7%, and then plus my Picoflash pulse. If I'm ready to work, I'll lock my padlock. Locking the padlock also lights up the probe holders that I will be using. And so make sure that you are on the correct probe cord. That's always the first thing to check when the current doesn't seem to be going through. And then I'm going to press on the foot pedal. So I have my foot pedal here in my hand, but you need to watch the lights. So these things here will actually light up when the different currents are being delivered. So I'm going to press on the foot pedal and hold it down. So this is for a full second, followed by a very quick pulse of Picoflash. If I lift off, this is the noise that I hear. As you can tell, I'm giving it a little bit of very, very low thermolysis, which isn't going to do anything, and no pulse of Picoflash, so no coagulation will happen. So this does absolutely nothing. You have to hold it down and then let it go. If you want to do two pulses with multiplex is best set on the machine. Let's go to the slide and I will show you that afterwards too. So 2 pulses with multiplex, essentially what the machine does is it does not repeat the pre-warming a second time. So here's our graph again. This is the pre-warming, which is the second pulse. The pulse that is 1 second. I should say it that way so it doesn't sound funny. The pulse that is 1 second in timing. These are the high frequency pulses. If I want 2 pulses of Picoflash, I can do this. I'm best to put it on the machine because if I use my foot, then what I'm doing is I'm doing the pre-warming pulse, which is just going to waste time. So set your machine to 2 pulses. The machine will only do the pre-warming once, and it will deliver both pulses of high frequency Picoflash. Remember that you can still adjust the timing in between these pulses. So let's go and see what that looks like. Back to our video. First, I'm going to do 2 pulses without setting it. So as if I'm doing in the same insertion, 2 pulses of multiplex. So that would be without changing it. Now, if I want to do this, by the way, you have to unlock when you want to mess with the settings here. You don't have to unlock it if you're just going to go and change a preset. But to change the settings as far as the time, the intensity, the pulses, you have to unlock your padlock. Move it up to 2, and I'm going to lock it again. Now, press and hold it down. And that's my 2 pulses of Picoflash at the end. Just for the sake of trying it out, let's go to 6 pulses. Let me actually make the timing a little shorter. Let's go to 0.3 of a second. So very quick time in between the pulses. I'm going to do 6 of them, but the pre-warming would only happen once. So let's do that. You can also lock the padlock by pressing on the foot pedal, which is what I just did. There is 6. Notice the difference in the tonalities. So when you press on the foot pedal and it goes the 6 beeps, you have a different tone at the very end. So sometimes when you get used to this, you should go through a pulse, make sure that you understand the different tonalities so that you know when to lift your foot off, especially when we go through the blends. This just shows the pre-warming there. We're back on our PowerPoint. And then the first pulse moving up because we're doing displacement and doing the second pulse at the bulge area. So Synchro. Synchro was first put out on the platinum machines and definitely refined a little bit more on the xCell. So there is a lot that you can do with Synchro on the xCell machines. Essentially what Synchro is, I know that when you look at the machine, you see 1 time and 1 intensity, but Synchro is actually a lot of very, very quick pulses of Picoflash, one after the other, with a short little relaxation time in between. So I like this graph because again, you can sort of see what this looks like. And let's say this is a ½ a second pulse in totality. You have a lot of very, very short pulses of Picoflash with a little bit of thermal relaxation time in between. That's the time in between my pulses. You usually on the platinum, you would have the Pico pulses being 0.002 and the thermal relaxation be 0.001. It never changes. On the xCell, you have the ability to change the Pico pulses and the thermal relaxation times. What this does is it actually allows your skin to cool off a little bit as you're packing in a lot of heat. The hair retains more heat than the skin does, and that's from laser theory. If you're familiar with IPLs, this is sort of what this emulates. So you're able to really pack a lot of heat while trying to protect the surrounding tissues as much as possible. This is the modality that we use, definitely for very stubborn, deep, thick hairs. Think your white hairs, your red hairs, even the type of telogen hairs that seem to be welded in place. So you can use this for any type of hairs, but think of your more stubborn cases. It is going to be more intense, so keep that in mind. The timing is longer here, so you have more collateral damage, meaning more redness and more scabbing in some cases. So it works really well, but it doesn't come without a bit of its punch too. When it was first developed, we did some sort of movement that was called the movement from bulb to bulge. Essentially, we would use very insulated probes like the IsoGuard, the ITHs, and I believe we have a little video showing that at one point. Let's see. No. So what we would do is we would insert down to the bottom of the hair follicle, and then as you press on the pedal, you would retract. And what that would do, it would deliver these pulses up along the follicle itself. And so you would have a movement that was from dermal papilla to bulge area, treating the bottom 2/3, which is usually our goal. That being said, we definitely expanded from that. And so I use Synchro with IBLs all the time. You can use Synchro with the TH and on a telogen hair without moving. You can use it any way that you want. You just have a little bit more heat. So normally this modality is going to be for generally more stubborn hairs. On the xCell, you have the ability to change the thermal relaxation and actual pulse intervals. That's what this last scroll bar is here. So we used to have pulses here. Now we have that pulse to thermal relaxation. Notice the energy levels when you change this because it will tell you if you're going hotter or cooler. Keep in mind that the most important number of the two tends to be the thermal relaxation. So how much time you leave for the heat to actually dissipate out of the tissues will say if the pulse is more is hotter or if the pulse is a little bit milder. So 2-1 is a 2 millisecond pulse with a 1 millisecond thermal relaxation. There is a lot more combinations now. They've updated the machine to give you even more options than this. But if you want to do Synchro on somebody who is sensitive, for example, so thick hairs, but very sensitive, and we all have those clients, and Synchro is just what works the best, you can actually use Synchro, but change this number here to have a little bit of a milder pulse. So for example, let's say we're on chin 6 and you're doing Synchro, that's kind of high, but I'm just going to throw some numbers out. If you're on 2-1, that will be very, very hot because the thermal relaxation doesn't allow for heat to dissipate. So you're packing heat into the skin without letting it dissipate out. But when you go into the 5-4, even though the pulse is a 5 millisecond pulse, which is longer, the 4 millisecond means that the heat can dissipate out of the tissue, so it cools off a lot more. With cooler skin, you don't have as much heat. It doesn't get as intense. Let's look at the Synchro modality on the screen here. So again, I have to go home. I'm going to select the Synchro and select my scroll bars. So I'm on bikini line 3, for example. I'm on the 2-1, and that gives me 317 energy levels. I have 0.19 seconds at 50%, and I can change this. So I can actually make it hotter, which is a 5-1. So remember I told you the second number is what is going to designate how intense this gets. If you keep it short, it means that the heat doesn't dissipate out of the tissues, so the more intense it will be. A 5-1 means a long pulse plus not a lot of time for the heat to go away. So it will be more intense. So I just jumped up to 396 energy levels. I can do the opposite and go all the way down, which is my 5.4, and this is 264 energy levels. This is all within the bikini line 3, and I do have a booster selected here, and so that's with that booster on top of it. So there's a lot of flexibility that you have even within the Synchro settings. Let's go back to our PowerPoint. So this slide will give you a summary of the different modalities with high frequency that you have on the machine and normally what they're used for. So Picoflash, if you remember, was our thousandths of a second high intensity. So for superficial hairs, facial hairs, telogen hairs, sensitive clients. Mellow flash will be sort of like our Picoflash, but in hundredths of a second, medium intensity, a little bit more wider of a coagulation pattern, so it's good for the deeper hairs, for the stubborn telogen hairs. The multiplex, where you're prepping the follicle before you are delivering the Picoflash pulses. So you use that in the same instance as you would mellow flash, but sometimes you can also use it on clients that are just sensitive and really can't handle mellow flash or even synchro. Synchro we'll use for our more difficult cases. So think about beards, think about deep bikinis, underarms, works really well, but it's going to be hotter than all of the other modalities. And when we do 2 pulses with displacement, this should say is for deeper hairs, right? In order to treat the dermal papilla to the bulge area. So adjusting the parameters, we've talked a little bit about how you can navigate the screen here. We have the presets, and as you've seen, we can actually change any of these numbers there. So this needs to be unlocked, and then you can move the scroll bars, type in the numbers, tap on the arrowheads in order to increase or decrease any of the settings that are here. So the machine is completely customizable, even though there is the presets. The presets are really well adjusted for thermolysis. And so usually I would say just stick to the presets with the boosters that are available now and all of the different fine tunings that you can do with the probes. There should really be not too much of a reason for you to start messing with these numbers here. Once you get to know the machine really well, of course, a lot of electrologists that are really comfortable with the machine can definitely start to play around with the settings and do a bunch of different things. Energy levels is a calculation of how much heat is produced in the follicle and is dependent on time and intensity. So there are a lot of different charts out there. These energy level averages are going to be different for the different frequencies of machines. So keep in mind that if you have the xCell, you have a 27.12 megahertz machine. And so the amount of energy required in order to coagulate tissues is actually going to be less than when you have a 13.56 megahertz machine. So that really is just an effect of the frequency itself. When you have twice the speed of the wave, you need half the amount of energy in order to create the same amount of coagulation. So we use these energy level averages in order to just know ballpark how much heat or how much energy is required for the type of treatment that we're doing. These numbers down there, fine, medium, coarse, and extra coarse, you can go up a little bit higher. Usually will give you an idea about how much energy is required if you're treating a coarse hair. This is for non-insulated probes. Let's say we're using an insulated BL and we're treating coarse hairs. We usually need about 365 energy levels. Could be more, could be less. Extra coarse will be even more than that, probably in the 400s or 500s, depending on what you're treating. So it gives you an idea, and that's what that sheet that I had in the files in the beginning, and I'll also have it at the end, is to give you an idea as to how much energy you should have on average. If you are messing around with these numbers and you do a little boo-boo, so instead of 0.15 here, let's say you put 0.55 for some reason, the machine will recalculate the energy level with this number in mind now, and will display something outrageous. So it will let you know that you've probably made a mistake somewhere and you need to go back and look at your time and your intensities. If you are working on super fine peach fuzz on somebody's upper lip and you have 600 energy levels, you're probably either on the wrong probe cord and so no current's coming out, which is why you keep increasing, or there's some sort of issue with insertion or something's going on. So it lets you know when you're kind of missing the mark here. Now, if you're working on a fine hair and you have 200 energy levels, is that the end of the world? No, maybe that's what you need, but it just gives you an idea. So that's my whole point with that. So let's get into the blends. The blend uses both high frequency and galvanic current. High frequency is the thermolysis we were just going through. And the high frequency in the blends, for the most part, is just there to prepare the follicle, the same way that we had it in Multiplex, where it's prepping the follicle, it's increasing conductivity. But instead of prepping the follicle for pulse of thermolysis, it's prepping the follicle for the galvanic current. So the high frequency warms up the tissues and transforms the intercellular substance into a porous mass. The porosity allows the penetration of the caustic soda that is produced by the galvanic current in the follicle. Galvanic usually needs a moist follicle to create the lye, so anagen phase is preferred. One of the ingredients to produce lye is water, and so you need a good amount of water in order to produce a good amount of lye. If you don't have all the ingredients, you usually end up cranking up the settings, and this is where things get a little bit wonky. When you do the blend process, because you are doing galvanic current, which is direct current, you need to have the ground. So anytime we are working with the blend, you have to give the client the ground, otherwise nothing will happen. And because the current is direct and traveling through the body, you do need to check for contraindications to galvanic current. So make sure there is no, for example, screw in this wrist where the current would go through and possibly interact with the metal in the body. So let's go through some of our blend modalities. First, let me go to the video here so that you can see the different modalities that we have here. So we go home. Blends are going to be our middle section here. So we have Pico blend, Omni blend, multi-blend, Evolute blend, and Synchro blend. The first blend that we're going to talk about is the Pico blend. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. This pops up, by the way, it's good that it's happening because the probe that I had selected in my machine was an IsoGuard, an ITH, which is not recommended to be used with the blend method. So it says Pico blend not available for probe type IsoGuard. Do you want to change the probe type? Just click yes. It will take me here. I'll just go ahead and select ISO blend. You can also select stainless steel. Here it doesn't matter. Click OK. So it does that. Now the machine will be happy. I can keep it on the Pico blend, press on my scroll bars. It takes me to the Pico blend screen. So let's go to the PowerPoint where it's much clearer so we can see what we're looking at. So Pico blend will be displayed here at the top. And then what we see is the galvanic or high frequency lead, energy levels, because yes, we do have some thermolysis being created, but this is not as important as the units of lye will be. Then down here, this is all of our settings. Under the battery is going to be our galvanic settings. Galvanic is in seconds and the intensity is in milliamps. Then we have our high frequency settings, which is the lightning bolt. So here we have 0.522 seconds at 6%. So we have about a half a second pulse with low intensity. So nothing that will coagulate, but just enough to be able to agitate. And because the Pico blend is a pulsing blend, we have pulses here. So when we look at this screen, we have an 8-second pulse at 0.38 MA, and then we have 3 pulses of high frequency in that are about half a second each at only 6% intensity. So when we look at a graph, the trapezoid shape here is the galvanic. The galvanic tends to do the same in most of the different modalities on the machine. The only one that does not do this is the Evolute blend, which we'll look at the end. So galvanic starts at 0. I press on my foot pedal here, and the current starts to climb up. It climbs up to reach whatever MA setting is set on the machine, and then it will stay consistent for most of the pulse. When you get close to the end of your time, which is also the 8 seconds here, it will start to ramp down until it reaches 0. In that pulse, then we have our high frequencies. That's the little waves that you see, the squiggles there. So the machine tells us that we have 3 pulses. Now there's 4 in this graph, but it doesn't matter. Imagine we're just getting rid of the last one. We have 3 pulses, or half a second each, at about 6%. This is like using a blender and using the pulse feature in order to move stuff around. So it just helps to agitate the lye in the follicle in order to kind of move it around and increase the conductivity of it. The Synchro blend is a lot like the Pico blend that we just saw, but it's the Pico blend on steroids. So you can imagine that instead of having pulses of Pico here, we actually have pulses of Synchro. And so the pulses of Synchro, if you remember, are going to be more intense. Synchro is more intense than Pico on the thermolysis side. And so the Synchro blend will be more intense than the Pico blend on the blend sides. If you notice, the galvanic does the same as it did before. So there's not too much that changes there. You can definitely do the movement around in the follicle when this is going through. So the synchronized movement from bulb to bulge, which is just kind of moving up and down in here in order to distribute the pulses of Synchro a little bit better. So here's our Synchro blend screen. So 8-second pulse, 0.38 MA. This is our galvanic. And then over here, 2%. And this is our thermal relaxation to pulse intervals, which again, you can still change. So you can adjust the Pico pulses and thermal relaxation. You have good, it's a good alternative to the pulsing blend. Again, if you like pulsing blend, which is what I usually refer to as one of the basic blends, you like the pulsing blend, you like to use it in your practice, but you need a little bit more intensity from it, then you can use the Synchro blend instead. And you'd want to use an insulated blend probe if you are going to be moving in the follicle. Anytime you're moving in the follicle, be careful if you're using a stainless steel. Omni blend is our other type of generic blend, or normal case type of blend. Omni blend is galvanic, and again, you see galvanic doesn't do much different here. It just does a little trapezoid shape and goes off. Our time is 8 seconds. Our MA is 0.38. But the thermolysis is different in this case. Whereas with Pico blend, it was delivered in pulses. Now we just have continuous. So all you're seeing is the 3% because the timing is essentially almost the whole duration of the pulse. So in the graph, you can see it as a continuous high frequency pulse at very low settings. We keep it low, max 8% on the 27 megahertz machine. The reason for that is because high frequency has a tendency to dehydrate. And we don't want to dehydrate when we do blend because the galvanic needs the moisture. So if you dehydrate the follicle and you try to create the moisture, or you try to use the moisture to create the lye, then you have two currents fighting against each other. The Omni blend on steroids would be your multi-blend here. So the multi-blend starts off just like the Omni blend was. So if you ignore this last pulse here, you have exactly what you had with Omni blend. Again, when you look at the first two sections here, this is our galvanic, 8 seconds, 0.38 MA. Then we have our Omni blend type of high frequency. We have just 2% and it's continuous. What multi-blend adds though is a pulse of Picoflash here at the very end of the pulse. So let's say you're working Omni blend and you feel like you need a little bit extra in order to detach the root of that hair. It's just biting you a little bit. You can select the multi-blend and have that extra pulse of true Picoflash at the end of the pulse, so it's not dehydrating in the beginning, and detach the root that way. So how do we know it's Picoflash? Well, we have 3 numbers past the decimal, so 28 thousandths of a second, and the intensity here might be a little bit low, but it depends on the preset that it was selected. Evolute blend is the only one where the blend does something completely different. So the galvanic here, instead of doing its usual trapezoid shape, it actually starts at 0 and it will just keep climbing up and up and up and up until the end of the pulse. This type of blend is usually for very sensitive clients. And the reason for that is because the pulse doesn't reach its max MA, so the 0.44, until the very end of the pulse. So the client really doesn't get the full impact of the intensity until the very end. So here, 10 seconds, 0.44 means that it will start at 0. And for 10 seconds, it will just increase until at the 10th second mark, it reaches the 0.44, which would be about right here. Obviously, this is not drawn to scale, but it is just to kind of give you a visual of what's happening. At the same time, we have continuous high frequency. So just like the Omni blend, we just have low, slow thermolysis in order to create that porosity, warm up the tissues, help the distribution of the lye. You use this type of modality on clients that are very sensitive, but you need a client that has a lot of moisture in their follicle because you're not reaching your max MA until the end. And so in order to be able to produce an adequate amount of lye, you need to have a lot of ingredients on hand. So make sure that you have nice, moist follicles. Think about teenagers for these types of cases. So a teenager, young skin, nice, moist skin, they're usually more sensitive, but maybe they're coming in for beard hairs, so thick hairs, where you would want to use a blend. You could opt to use the Evolute blend because they'll tend to have nice, moist skin, but their sensitivity means that they're not really tolerant of much else. So Evolute blend would be a great case for something like that. The machines now come with straight galvanic. So this slide no longer applies because there's actually a straight galvanic modality, which is just galvanic current itself. So let's go back to our video and I'll show you what it looks like now. We used to have to set it, but now what we do is we'll just go home here. And underneath the third bar here, this is the cataphoresis normally, but it's changed now to be electrolysis, which is our straight galvanic, and then we have cataphoresis and anaphoresis. So I'll select the electrolysis, press on my scroll bars, and now here what I have displayed is just galvanic current. So you can set this to be whatever you want there. It does have, it does correlate with some of the presets anyway, and calculates the units of lye up here. So the blend techniques is usually best for deep hairs in anagen phase, distorted hairs, those sorts of cases. You can choose between a pulsing blend, which is your Pico blend, and your Omni blend, which are your most generic types of blends. Remember, one has pulses of high frequency and one has continuous high frequency. Then we can go a level up and choose between multi-blend or synchro blend. Multi-blend will essentially be our Omni blend, but with that extra pulse of high frequency at the end. So for coarse, stubborn, distorted, deep hairs. And our synchro blend is like our pulsing blend, but instead of having Picoflash, we have Synchro, which is much more intense. And so again, for more stubborn, distorted, coarse types of hairs. And then our Evolute blend, which is the one that just ramps up, that is for more sensitive clients. As far as adjusting the parameters, usually with the blend, I recommend that you do it more manual than with the presets. It tends to be a little bit easier to manually find out or do a tolerance test and find out what a client can actually handle and then plug that back in. So what we do is I'll show you, we'll go back into our home screen and we'll actually go into our tests and we are going to select the tolerance test. So I will do this on the webcam. So go home. Actually, let me select a blend first. We're going to do Omni blend because that's an easy one to play around with. And so in the Omni blend, remember that we have our continuous high frequency at a low level and then our time and intensity. So I'm going to be working on a client's underarms and I would like to be able to customize my setting for that client. And so what I will do is I will go into my tests. The tests are the little arrow kind of climbing a mountain here. So when I click on the tests here, this is an accessories test. We'll go through that. This is a moisture test and it is not usually available on the US machines. And this is a tolerance test. So the little graph here with the arrow pointing up at a 45-degree angle is what I want. So when I press here, I have a scroll bar here that shows up at the bottom, and it says 0.0 MA. What I want to do is I want to find out how much MA can my client handle on whatever area I'm working on. So I said underarm for today. So I will give my client the ground. So this is the ground. If you remember, you need to cover the ground with some sort of wet paper towel, the sponge that comes with it, something that is moistened so that you can have better conductivity. So I give my client the ground, and then I will do an insertion, do a perfect insertion, because you know that if you're off into the tissues on the side, the galvanic will actually hurt much more than if you're correctly in the follicle. So I do a perfect insertion, and then I will let my client know, okay, I'm going to press on the foot pedal and I'm going to hold it down. Let me know when you feel it and let me know when it's enough. When it's enough, I'll lift my foot off the pedal and I will get a number here. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'll use my foot pedal and I will press and hold it down. What you'll notice is that it is slowly increasing. I'm going to say, oh, I feel it. I feel it. Okay, stop. Then I lift off the pedal. Stops my little diagram here, and I have 0.54 MA. So this would be a tolerance test. Usually I recommend you do maybe 2 to 3 because you know that you can have one zinger, whereas some of the other hairs aren't really hurting too much. So I'll tap on the foot pedal and it will zero it out again, do another insertion, press and hold down the foot pedal, let it go up, kind of say, okay, I feel it. It's not bad. It's fine. Okay, I'm good. And then it'll go, okay, stop. Then you lift off the foot pedal. Now I have 0.63 MA. Let's say this is what I want to use. I'll go back into my presets, or my treatment screen, I should say. And the machine already plugged in that number. So this says 0.63. I know you can't see it too well, but it says 0.63, which is the number I just tested for. The machine will then also calculate units of lie for you. So this is 44 units of lie. This is another thing we'll have to fix. On a future update, I would like this to be interactive, so me to actually be able to put in my units of lie up here. But essentially, units of lie, just like calculations of energy level, tells you how much lie you are producing in the follicle using this time and this intensity. So I have 7 seconds. I have 0.63 MA. Therefore, I'm producing 44 energy levels. 44 units of lie. The units of lie averages are 20, 40, 60, 80. So 20 is for fine hair, 40 is for medium, 60 is for coarse, 80 is for extra coarse. Now, if we go back to my case where my client cannot handle more than 0.63 MA, I've tested for this, so I'm not going to touch this anymore. But she has coarse hairs. I only have 44 ULs, and so I need to get this up to about 60. In order to get this up to 60, then I will have to increase the time. So if I go up to 8 seconds, I'm at 50. If I go up to 9 seconds, I'm at 57. I could try this. So I could try 57 units of lie, 9 seconds, 0.63 MA, and see how that goes. So that is sort of doing it manually by testing the tolerance of your client, figuring out how many units of lie do you need, depending on the size of the hair, and then playing with your time and going up or down depending. You can use the presets. The presets are here on the side. And so the presets, when you click on those, you could just select, let's say we're on bikini already. And let me go to bikini 7 and click OK. And then it will populate it for me, which is actually kind of funny because it put 9 seconds, 0.64 MA, which is almost what I had anyway. So it will just give me a time and an intensity depending on what I have selected. The probe that I have selected is a size 2BL, which is probably pretty small for what I'm doing there. I'm just going to go to a 4. The 4BL will increase the intensity somewhat. So it kept my time and my intensity almost the same. This went up to 0.68, but my units of lie are at 61 now. So this went up a little bit just because I went up in probe size. So you can adjust a lot of the different settings and fine tune. You can use the presets or you can use the tolerance tests. Both of those will kind of customize the setting to what you think you need. Let's go back to our PowerPoint. So here's our units of light I was just talking about displayed here on the screen. And you have fine, medium, coarse, extra coarse. Okay, this is the unit of light calculation. This is straight out of the Hinkle book. So, and it doesn't matter what machine you have, the galvanic current is galvanic current on all the machines. And so use the 13.56 megahertz, you use a silhouette tone, you use an instantron, it doesn't matter. When it comes to galvanic current, units of light correlates. Energy levels, not the same thing. Okay, so don't try to compare energy levels across machines unless you're talking about the exact same machine, and even then there may be some variations. So the lead, we didn't talk about the lead here. The lead is kind of interesting, as in it is to decide which current do I want to come on, to turn on first when I press on the foot pedal. Factory preset means that the lead will be the galvanic, which is the battery, first, and then the high frequency second. I can change this. So I've just selected the Pico blend and I want to show you something. So the lead is up here. If you notice between the energy level and the Pico blend up top. So this is our leads. And watch when I press on the foot pedal, which of the currents turns on first. So it lights up, right? So I'm going to lock this, press on my foot pedal. And as soon as I pressed, this lights, then this lights. That's the lead. So I lead with galvanic, high frequency comes in second. So press this and then this. I can change that by pressing on this, and now it flips it. What you see is you actually see the wave first and the battery second. So when I lock this, I press on the pedal, you'll see this, then this. It's still pulsing, but I had a pulse of high frequency first, and then the galvanic came on second. Omni blend, same thing. It remembered my lead here. So now when I press on this, I should see this first, and it's marginally this first, and then after that you see this, because they're both sort of continuous, so they almost turn on at the same time. If I switch this, unlock, switch, lock. Then I had battery first, and then I had the high frequency. So that is the leads. Cataphoresis and anaphoresis. If we go back into our home screen, we can select the cataphoresis first, which is Cata plus, which is ionization in the positive pole. We use this normally for post-care. It is calming and reduces redness. It's germicidal. It constricts blood vessels. It calms down the sebaceous gland, which can definitely become stimulated after thermolysis. And we normally do this for about 3 to 5 seconds with a positively ionized product, if possible. It is available in the US. So why does it calm and reduce redness? Because it's a vasoconstrictor. So the current actually interacts with the blood vessels in the skin and constricts those blood vessels. So you help to calm down the skin, close the pore, reduce the swelling, because you're kind of constricting some of those vessels in the skin. It's germicidal because it produces hydrochloric acid on the skin, which is what you produce at the positive pole all the time. And because you're sort of acidifying the pH of the skin, it makes for essentially a living environment that is not good for bacteria. So you're killing bacteria just because you're making the skin slightly acidic. The sebaceous gland, like I said, actually becomes kind of excitable from the thermolysis treatment. So clients that tend to break out a lot you could spend a little bit more time doing cataphoresis because the cataphoresis can actually calm the sebaceous gland, constrict that duct, and so you might see a little bit less breakouts. I have good luck with some clients doing cataphoresis for breakouts, and with others, the high frequency machine is a little bit better. So you just have to see with the clients which one works best. You do need to do that for about 3 to 5 minutes in order for it to be worth anything, and spend longer on clients that maybe break out a lot, that are, you did a lot of work and so they're very red, they're very swollen, and you can help to sort of promote healing. We use a positively ionized product because we're using a positively charged probe, or electrode, I should say. The product is positively ionized. My electrode is positively ionized, and according to Coulomb's law, positive repels positive, so it forces the product deeper into the skin than if you were just to put it on and massage it in. So if you have a healing product and you're trying to get it into the tissues, doing cataphoresis, as long as the product is positively ionized, definitely is beneficial. We have anaphoresis on the machine, which normally is more for aesthetic type of treatments. It's just that you have the positive and the negative pole. The deep cleansing is something that you do, like a disencrusting type of facial. It essentially helps to open the pores, liquefy the sebum, and soften the skin so that you can do an extraction facial for acne skin. So it's not usually something that we will do with cataphoresis, with electrolysis at all, but it's on the machine. As far as adjusting the parameters for cataphoresis, it will come preset for you depending on the area that you had selected. So if you were using the presets, and let's say it was eyebrow, then when I click on my cataphoresis and I go into the screen, it will automatically have a milliamp level that is appropriate for eyebrow. Keep that in mind if you are working on multiple body parts. So let's say you did eyebrow, and then you did underarm, and then you did bikini. Then you come back and you start to do cataphoresis on the eyebrow. But the last setting you had was a bikini setting. So the machine will put in bikini level of MA, which would be too high for the eyebrow and can definitely be a little bit more painful for the client. So keep that in mind. You might want to go in here and put in the appropriate body part, or you just change it manually. When you get to know the machine, you know about what ballpark numbers you need. You can, again, move the little circle. You can use the arrowheads. If you're increasing, you can press on the foot pedal, and the foot pedal will increase these settings here, or you can press directly on the numbers. A numerical box will come up and you can type in whatever you want. When you do cataphoresis, you have to give the client the ground. This is a type of direct current, and so they have to be holding the ground, which is the red cord, with the plate or the rod covered with a moist paper towel or the sponge. If they don't hold this, then the current is not complete and this will never work. You know when cataphoresis is going because the battery here will light up red. If this does not light up red, it's not working. Now, the reason why it might not be working is because you didn't lock your padlock. So when you do cataphoresis, don't press on the foot pedal. Don't hold it down. You don't need to press on the foot pedal to do cataphoresis. All that does is it increases the MA, and it will essentially bring it up to its highest level, which becomes painful for the client. So we don't want to do that, but you want to lock your padlock. So make sure you lock that in order to lock the settings in, give the client the ground, and then when you make contact with the skin, you should see this light up. Rule of thumb for cataphoresis is that clients may feel some tingling, clients may feel nothing at all, but it should never hurt. If a client doesn't feel anything, I'll normally just double check on my screen here that my battery's lit up. Sometimes it's not, and the reason for that is because I didn't lock it. That's usually the most common reason. This talks about all the different things on the screen. I'm just going to go through each one of them one by one, so let's just continue there. So the programs, these are presets. There are quite a bit of presets on the machine, and we can attain them just by going over here. So let's go to our webcam, and I will go ahead and select my presets and press here. Presets, you have the female settings and the male settings. The main difference between the two is just that the male settings are slightly higher than the female settings. So there's no reason why you can't just always work on one screen. It just offers you, for example, chin 3 on the female settings is just going to be a little bit less intense than chin 3 on the male settings. And we can see that. Let me go into a Thermolysis though. Let's go into Mellow Flash. So chin 3 on the female settings is 0.10 of a second, 44%, 194 energy levels. If I just change to the male settings for the same thing, I have 0.10, 46%, 212 energy levels. So all it is just that I have maybe not even an extra 20 energy levels because my percent went up a little bit. They just assume thicker hair, and for that reason, will give you a little bit more energy. So in the female settings, you have the circles. The circles are how you select the body part, and I can move around here. Now, of course, you're not going to have every body part known to man on here. If you are trying to do something that is not on the machine, just try to pick something comparable. For example, fingers. If you're working fingers, you can maybe try upper lip because the hairs are super, super fine. Or maybe you could try arm and just a low level arm. All of that will work. So if I select here the bikini, then I have to select an intensity. Intensities, my presets go from 0 all the way to 9, and 0 is a setting. So if I'm doing bikini, let's go to maybe bikini 3, and then I will press, I'm going to zero this out, and I'm going to press OK. Bikini 3 should show here on the side. It will give me a time and intensity that is going to be my bikini 3 preset. Energy levels are calculated based on these numbers here. So one pulse of Mellow Flash at bikini 3 is 162 energy levels. Now 162 energy levels is about a fine to medium hair on a bikini, for example. Let's go back to our PowerPoint. So here are the areas. These are essentially the numbers. What it's referring to is these numbers down here. So it gives you an idea as to where to start. If you are dealing with a fine hair, usually want to go between 0 to 3, depending. When you're dealing with medium hairs, you're going to go from 4 to 6. And for coarse hairs, 7 to 9. Always double check your energy levels to make sure that you're not overdoing it. User programs are your own creations. So you can also save your own created programs. Under each modality, you have up to 10 spots to save your own mixtures of time and intensity. So Picoflash, for example, Picoflash user settings, you could come up with your own times and intensities and pulses and save those under user settings. And then you can recall them at a later time. So all the machines will have some sort of feature like that. You have 10 spots under Picoflash, 10 spots under Mellow Flash, 10 spots under Multiplex, and so on and so forth. So there's quite a bit of them. You will name them to however you want. And that's one nice thing about the machine with a touch screen. You can have a lot more information on a computer screen than what we used to have with the Platinum and with the seniors, where you could really only have numbers, let's say, maybe some letters. You can further fine-tune a preset by changing the type of probe size, probe installation, and that would be found on this button down here. So what we see on that screen, and we'll go ahead and select it on the camera. So I picked my bikini 3. Now I'm going to change, let's say, my probe. And so what I see on this screen is and this says stainless steel now. Inox was sort of the French translation to stainless steel. And so it didn't make too much sense for us, but it should say stainless steel. And then we have IsoGuard and we have IsoBlend. These are different types of ProTech insulated probe, right? An IsoGuard is insulated almost to the tip. So if you use Ballet insulated, if you use most of the other companies' insulated probes, you need to select the IsoGuard preset out of these three options here. The IsoBlend is a probe that is insulated about halfway. So this is a probe that we use for deeper types of insertions, or the blend method, hence why it's called IsoBlend. If you work with stainless steel, then you will select the stainless steel. Then we have the sizes. They go from 1 to 5. Now I know that Ballet has a 6, but they don't have a 2, and so you can use your best judgment here. Will it make or break your setting? No. So it doesn't matter if you really never change this, so much as it just doesn't fine tune it. So if I have an F3 and I select F3, I can select stainless steel, IsoGuard, or IsoBlend. Another very important thing on the screen is which probe cord are you using? We have A and we have B. How you know which cord is active is the one where the light is actually lit up on top of the probe cord. So when I have this screen here, we go back to the video, I will show you that down below, when I look here, I have my 4 cords plugged into the machine. And there's actually one that's lit up, which is this one here. So that is the probe cord that is active right now. If I were to use this one to do my treatment, no current would come out at all. So anytime you're having issues, always make sure to follow your cord all the way to your machine. Make sure that the light is actually shining on it. Next, make sure that it's tightened in there. Sometimes when we move it around a lot, it loosens up. And how we change from one to the other is on that screen. So if I was on B, I could switch to A, and it will just change where the cord is. So let me show you here. Get my hand out the way. This is B, this is A. So you can see it move from one to the other just by changing the lead. Okay, so there we go. So as far as using insulated versus non-insulated probes, using non-insulated probes just means that you have a much bigger surface area. And usually with currents, even though you have slight differences in how the current is dispersed along the probes in high frequency versus galvanic, you still have essentially loss of power higher up on the probe where it's not necessary. So our target is on an anagen hair, for example, the bottom 2/3 of the follicle. So the top third, where you have the upper layers of the skin, you don't really need energy up there and coagulation to happen or lye to be produced. But because the probe is in contact with the tissues, there is going to be some energy up in those upper layers of the skin. So with a non-insulated probe, you have loss of energy up here where it's not necessary. As long as the probe is in contact with the skin, there is going to be some energy dispersed in that area. This is high frequency. High frequency has a point effect, and so that means that the higher concentration of energy is always going to be at the tip. But that does not mean that the current doesn't actually disperse itself up here also. It's just not as intense as it's going to be at the tip. So usually with a probe like that, in order to have a wide enough coagulation pattern, we usually need to have higher settings because some of the energy that could be concentrated down here ends up coming out up here. So loss of energy up higher in the skin, you need higher parameters. Higher parameters just means it's going to be less comfortable and you're going to see more risks of skin reaction because you have more energy going up in the upper layers of the skin. The galvanic does not do the point effect like thermolysis does. So galvanic gets produced evenly along the walls of the probe that is in contact with moisture. So any part of the probe that is in the skin will produce lye. So usually if you have it up here, again, you just have lye being produced on the upper layers of the skin where normally you should try to keep energy or lye from touching so that you're not creating some sort of damage up there. Using insulated probes just means that you're concentrating the energy where you want it. So if you're doing thermolysis, for example, now you can see that this is covered in some sort of insulation. So no current can go through this, not unless you essentially blow out through the insulation, which can definitely be done if you have too high of parameters. But all the energy is concentrated at the tip. You have no loss of power up here. So in order to create this wide of a heating pattern, I don't need as much energy. So my parameters will be lower. And because my parameters are lower, it's more comfortable and I have less skin reactions because no energy is up here. With the blend, it's the same thing. You can use an insulated probe with blend, but you have to be careful into what degree the insulation covers the probe. Remember that the lye is produced evenly along the walls of the probe. It doesn't go to the tip and do a point effect like thermolysis. So you need surface area. When you're doing blend, don't pick a probe that is too insulated, where you're essentially reducing the surface area so much that the lye takes forever to produce because it just doesn't have the space to do so. So the ISO blends were created for that reason. At least it protects the top of the skin, but you've got enough surface area to produce lye. Auto mode is working without the foot pedal, and that is the last little box here on our screen. The auto mode means that I can essentially use my probe as a sensor in order for the machine to automatically deliver the pulse without me having to press on the foot pedal. So when I select this enabled button, it takes me to a screen that shows me foot pedal mode or auto mode, working without the foot pedals. You have the circle with the line through it. When I select this auto mode here, this activation delay shows up. How auto mode works is that you give the client the ground because you're going to have some sort of sensor. The client holds the ground. Remember, the ground has to be wrapped in that wet paper towel, the wet sponge, whatever you've got in order to have good connectivity. And then I'm going to, and then the probe will essentially sense moisture. When it touches the top of the skin, it senses the skin, it senses the moisture on the skin, and it starts a countdown. This countdown is how long you have in order to do an insertion. And then the machine will automatically deliver the pulse, whatever you've got it set up to up here. So that activation delay is how long do you want from the time where my probe touches the skin to the time when the machine delivers the current. Factory preset will be 1.5 seconds. You can adjust that depending on your natural insertion pace, where you're working. Why insertion could be much faster on a lower leg than it would be on a bikini, for example. So you might have to change how long you give yourself to do an insertion before the machine automatically delivers the pulses for you. Let's go ahead and do that on the machine so we can take a look. So I'm still in my probe screen, so I'm just going to get out of that by pressing OK. And I'm going to go with my foot pedal down here. So this says enabled. I'm going to put it on auto mode. And then I can change my activation delay, right? So you can move this up and down. You can use the arrowheads, and you can also tap directly on this. And let's say I want 1 second even. So a 1 second delay. Press OK. When I'm on auto mode, this changes. Now I have the pedal in a circle with a line through it, and this says 1 second, which is my activation delay. I give my client the ground covered with the paper towel that is wet or the sponge, and when I make contact with the skin, it will automatically make a little tink noise. Make sure you lock your padlock. And then I think this is the right probe. Let me see if it's going to do it. So all I'm doing is I'm doing the connection here on the probe cord. But you can hear that noise. The first noise means it sensed moisture. When I lift off the pedal, so not the pedal, when I lift out of the skin, let's say my insertion is incorrect, and I pull out of the skin, that's when it makes that tunk noise. That tells me that it's interrupted the current, and so it's not, essentially it's canceled it. It's not going to deliver the pulse until you stay the appropriate amount of time. So press and hold it down. You go inside the hair follicle, stay in there. The machine will give you 1 second to do that, and then it will deliver the pulse. We turn that off just by going back in the screen here. Go back to pedal mode, click OK. Now it's back to using the foot pedal. And so now when I work, I just have to press on the foot pedal in order to deliver the current. The timer is much better on the xCell than on the other machines because you can actually have this timer go into hours, and also the alarm can go into hours. So if your client comes in and you're ready to set up for work, what we're going to do, let's go back to our camera. So I press on the little stopwatch here on the side, and this is my timer screen. The timer here on the left, and I can zero it out by using this, so this zeroes everything back out. The timer is your full treatment time. So let's say I have a client coming in for 2 hours. So I am going to put 2 hours here, no minutes. You could do 2 hours and 30 minutes if that was the length of your appointment. And then I usually stop to do cataphoresis about 5 minutes before the end. So I have a 2-hour session and I want an alarm 5 minutes before the end. And so I will do this for 5 minutes. When I do 2 hours and then a 5-minute alarm. You could do 2-hour timer, and let's say that you want to work an hour on one leg and an hour on the other. You could set yourself a 1-hour alarm and it will essentially beep halfway through. So you don't have to pay attention to your timer. You could just have a 2-hour timer, but an alarm halfway through, which you've set here for 1 hour, and that will tell you time to switch legs, for example. So here I have a 2-hour session, a 5-minute timer, click OK. And this is what it shows here, 2 hours. So I can stop my timer by pressing directly on the time itself. It will start to count down from here. If I want to pause it because I have to go to the bathroom or anything like that, I just tap on it again. So it's active when it's lit up. It's not active when it's not. Let's go back to our PowerPoint. The pulse, essentially this is the hair counter that we talked about earlier. So the hair counter will count how many pedal pushes. For example, my machine right now displays 12 because with our little tests, I've maybe pressed on the pedal about 12 times. Remember that you can reset that by pressing on this arrow directly, and it will reset that to 0, and you can start with a new client counting the hairs. So let's go into our test menu. So now we have to go home, and now ignore the second part of this because this is for the Pro. So your screen will actually stop with the configuration menu here. So I'm going to go home and I'm going to select the test menu. So back to our camera, I'm going to go home and then I'm going to select the test, which is that little mountain climber. The moisture test wouldn't be available on most machines if you are in the US, which is kind of normal here. So you might not see this at all. You would just see the accessories test and the tolerance test. Remember the tolerance test, we use that to calculate the amount of MA, milliamps, that our client could handle in order to customize our blend method. So tolerance test we've talked about already. We've even done one. So this is a pretty self-explanatory slide, but you have it here. Let's go through the accessory test. So I want you to understand just how the accessory test is actually done in case you ever have to do that. So I'm going to go back to my camera here and I'm going to select the accessory test. I'll read this out and let me back up my machine so that you can see a little bit better what we're going to be doing. And actually put this down here. So I want you to focus more on the chords here in the front, and I will read what is on the screen so that you can see what's happening. So essentially it says, check that probe holder A, and you see, look, it's lit up. So these are the two that I'm going to be needing to mess with. I'm not testing these right now. So this is probe holder A, this is probe holder B. So check that probe holder A, the one to the left, is well connected. Okay, so I'm going to tighten this, looks good. Remove the plastic cap from the probe holder. So I don't have a cap on here, so you want to expose the prongs. And then you're going to insert the prongs into the the red connector. So I take this out. I don't need this right now. I'm going to insert my probe holder in here, and then you're going to press on the foot pedal. I press on the foot pedal, and when things are good, it says functional on the screen. If it's not good, then it would say defective. So what I'm looking for is something that says functional. So it says functional, so we're good. Essentially, you go through this and you're going to test every cord. The main thing you have to understand with the accessories test is that you need both ends of the cord to be connected to the machine somehow. So if it's the red cord, if it's the black cord, both ends have to be put into the machine. If you don't have that, then it's not going to show it as functional. For example, I'm going to press OK. Now it says probe holder B, which is the one on the right side, has to be connected into the red connector, but I'm not going to connect it because I want you to see. So I have it here. I'm not going to put it into the machine, and I'm just going to press on the foot pedal. And now it says defective, right? Because essentially the machine sent a current down the probe, and it was looking for it to come back so that it could make sure that what it sent, it received back. And because I didn't have this connected into the machine, it just went nowhere. So it tested that as defective. You would have to actually have it plugged into the machine where we had it before in order to see it as functional. Let's go through our configuration menu. The configuration menu is the fourth one down, so you can actually press on the two little gears and it will show you a menu that has 3 icons. Essentially, this is kind of self-explanatory. This is time and date, this is language and sounds, and this is going to be screensaver, calibration, that sort of thing. So time and date, you did this when you bought the machine the first time, and you're probably going to have to go back into it every time we go through daylight savings. And so that's the only time that I have to go in here and subtract or add an hour depending on what we have to do. The second one is languages. You're not going to have this column here because you don't have a printer here. So that's for the Pro. So the language that you display, you can change it to whatever other language you speak if you're more comfortable in something other than English. Then we have the volume. So the volume is literally just for the beeps, right? So when we press on the foot pedal, you can have it be real loud or be real quiet or be off completely. When this is all the way down, there is no sound at all. And then we have different types of noises. So every time you click and select something on the screen, it can actually make a little click noise. Cell phones do that too. Sometimes if you're familiar, when you're typing, it goes tick, 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 tick. You can remove that noise just by clicking on the check mark and removing that. So let me show you how to deselect things. This is the webcam. I'm going to go into my sounds. And here, if I tap right on it, it removes it. And if I have it here, this is selected. The abort noise is kind of the little boink noise that you hear sometimes, and you can remove that. The alarm is a noise for the alarm. You'd want to keep that. And the message is a little bing that comes up with a message box when it pops up. We saw a message box when I switched over to the blends, and it was telling me to change my probe selection. So when that pops up, it kind of does a little ding ding, and then there's a message box displayed. I can have that be silent. That's one that you might want to remove. It doesn't really make or break anything. Normally the alarm, you'd want to hear that. And the abort noise, you'd want to hear that because that tells you that you did something wrong. And the click noise could be something else that you decide to remove because you don't want to hear yourself tapping on the screen every time you're making a selection. The noise, the volume, you can hear just by going up and down here as far as the volume goes. And so when it's all the way down, the volume is off, and then you are not going to hear anything anymore. Okay. let's go into our last configuration menu, which is the screensaver, the timer stop delay. So this one here, there might be a few things you would want to do. The screensaver is the machine when it's unattended for a certain amount of time sort of starts to display some pictures. That's not too bad. You can definitely change how long it takes for it to go to sleep before you actually start to see the rotating of the pictures. But the one that you might want to actually do something about is the timer stop delay. So the timer stop delay is essentially when you're in the treatment modes and you're working on a client and you have a timer set. So remember I set a timer for 2 hours. Well, let's say that somebody knocks on the door. So I put everything away and I have to go to the front to see who's at the door. Well, my timer keeps going because I left quickly and so I forgot to pause it. After 2 minutes of nothing happening, and nothing happening means no pressing on the foot pedal. Remember, that's how the machine can really gauge what you're doing. So I haven't pressed on the foot pedal for at least 2 minutes. My timer will pause automatically. One thing that happens though is that when you're doing cataphoresis, because you're not using the foot pedal, it also senses that as you being gone, and so it will pause the timer while you're doing cataphoresis. And that can be frustrating because I leave 5 minutes and sometimes I just wait for the ding ding of my timer to go off in order to stop. And every once in a while if I have this on, the timer will stop on its own and I'm just, going away doing cataphoresis and then wondering why is it taking so long? And then I look back and I see my timer's paused. So you can actually up that threshold, or if you put it on infinity, it means that it will never stop. So you're essentially disabling this. Same with the screensaver. If you never want to see the pictures rotated, just put it on infinity. It means that it will never go to sleep. If you don't want the timer to stop on its own, you're always just going to do it yourself, or, well, then you need to put it on the infinity. You can set a password on your machine. So I'll show you mine. Mine's disabled right now. So if you go to the video, what you'll see is that the timer has a little X next to it. So if you have a machine at your office and you don't want anybody else, you can actually set a timer. I won't. This is one from the school and all the different students use it. But you can set a timer. And so when you turn on your machine, essentially you'll have to put in a timer to get into it. So not everybody can do it. Calibration is when you want to calibrate the screen. So I'm going to run through it because sometimes, let's say I'm trying to press on a button, but I always have to press a little bit off in order for it to work. And so in order to do that, you might have to recalibrate the screen. So I'm going to press OK. Essentially what you have to do is you just have to tap directly in the middle of the little crosses here. Follow it along the screen. Do that a couple times, and then the machine will kind of recalibrate itself and come back to life. So calibration is just something like that. You might not have to ever do that, but know that that's where it is. So backups, data transfers, and updates are done via USB. And so you can have the latest version of your machine and actually update it in there. Sometimes it comes with new features, which is one of the big things, one of the main reasons why you might want to update. For example, the extra ELs that, like I said, are not part of this PowerPoint, but I will go into those. And so I won't forget, but we'll talk about extra ELs, which was definitely added later on. So sometimes we'll have new features. Sometimes it's just going to be updates, work out some bugs, that sort of thing. So we do that via USB. You have a USB drive that anyone will work. You can download the latest version and then upload it to your machine in order to swap it out. You can also do the backups is more going to be for the pros because there's actual data that they keep in there, such as client files and that sort of thing. So if you have a pro, always do a backup before you do an update so that you don't accidentally lose everything because something went wrong. The Synchro option, if you have a PUR and you did not purchase the Synchro and you decide that you want it, one nice thing is that you can actually buy it at any time and just activate it using a product code. So nothing's lost there. You just end up buying the Synchro option. Essentially what I have is, well, I'm going to get out, let's go back to our camera, and I'm going to get out of this. And what I have here is the Synchro option, and you can have an aesthetic option in some countries to add extra things if you're an esthetician and you want to use some of the vitaphases, for example. So my Synchro option, my insertion count for the machine. So since it's been turned on, how many times has somebody pressed on the foot pedal? And that's 19,845. My software version, this is where you see it. So this is software version 2.8. So if you have anything less than that, you might want to actually update your machine. So software version, you can see what that is directly in the configuration screen. This is where we are right now. So there's two things that we need to talk about. First, let's talk about extra ELs. Let me actually get a new pod up with the file. One second. Okay. So let me maximize this so everybody can see it. Let's see if we can have this be one page. Okay. So this document, like I said, you can actually download it from the files that I have uploaded. But essentially what we added to the machine is something called extra EL. We also call them boosters. And what it is just increments that are between presets. So if you select, for example, this is eyebrow 4, well, you can have eyebrow 4, and then you can have eyebrow 4 with one booster, which is one circle filled in here that will give you a little bit more intensity. Then you can have eyebrow 4 with 2 boosters, so 2 circles filled in, which gives you even more energy. And then eyebrow 4 with 3 boosters, which gives you even more energy than that. So it just gives you some extra energy or extra okay, sorry, you should be able to hear me. I booted myself out by accident, so that was my fault. So it gives you a little bit of extra energy that you can use in order to kind of bridge the gap between what would be eyebrow 4 and eyebrow 5. And the other thing is I wanted to give everybody the link for registering your machine at the end. So let's go into this here. So let me get the link to register your machine. I'll put it in the chat box. It is this one here. If you haven't done so already, then this is where you can do it. Okay, so this is the link. And if you haven't registered your machine, you can go ahead and do that. You'll just have to put in your serial number. You'll need to have that at least. And the site should tell you how to access it. Other than that, this concludes the training for the Apple's xCell PUR. And so I am going to stop the recording and then take any questions you may have.